It's not a new opinion to say Bloodborne's visceral and poetic use of gothic and cosmic horror makes it one of the most poignant and harrowing games I've ever played. While not scary in the traditional sense, Bloodborne unapologetically crawled under my skin in a way that reinvigorated my love for the horror genre. I think far too often when it comes to video games, survival horror has been perceived as just exclusively about tension, scares, narrow environments, limited resources, and a constant sense of vulnerability that we've culturally diluted what horror itself actually is. And don't get me wrong, Bloodborne has all these elements, but as a more action-focused experience delving into surreal fantasy, it still challenges the premise that to make something horrific, you have to take away from the player. In many respects, Bloodborne is about finding the resources to overcome your fears. It's about battling through the deepest, darkest existential conflicts of the human condition. It's more than just an extension to the Souls-like genre From Software has cultivated. Bloodborne is the ultimate expression of a nightmare. A game like Bloodborne is largely driven by self-induced anxiety. It's a dangerous, difficult adventure where death can hit you in an instant. There's a constant desperation in hoping that the next lamp will just be around the corner so you can use those sweet blood echoes to level up or acquire resources to help you through the next treacherous environment. By default, these are integral elements to fear, as horror is about challenging your comfort zones in provocative ways, carried by your morbid curiosity to see what lurks beyond the shadows. Although Bloodborne encapsulates something that's largely missing from the genre. We throw around the concept of isolation so much that we neglect and overlook the more subversive effect of desolation that drives the emotional core of the experience. There is an uncanniness to wide open terrain that leaves you feeling uncomfortably exposed. I think as we become accustomed to small dark settings, which universally work as a tried and true formula for fear, Bloodborne takes a uniquely abstract approach by literally giganticizing its world and making you out to be abnormally small within it. After all, if we base our journey on symbolism rather than pure lore, I saw the broad goal as about escaping a terrible nightmare, and by being physically small in this world as opposed to simply closing it in around us, it accentuates an unusual sense of displacement and emotional outcast. It's like how a young child sees the world change and become exaggerated in darkness, except this is an adult's descent into madness generated by unthinkable terrors, conveyed by a traditional world that becomes less and less civilized and human as the night progresses. The thing about most artistic interpretations of Lovecraft is that they far too often get caught up in the pure aesthetic as opposed to justifying themselves with thematic or allegorical elements. Bloodborne, on the other hand, uses it to create a more personal narrative than it initially appears. Like Dark Souls, you're seen as just another wannabe hero destined for something grand. Except here, I think that grandness you're subconsciously seeking is merely an illusion. Similar to Lovecraft's themes of insignificance, several Gothic stories like Bram Stoker's Dracula and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein that are stylistically rooted in Bloodborne involved characters that deviated from society's rules, norms, and perceptions. People that were seen as strange, hostile, and alien, except that's how they themselves came to see the world. In fact, since your character is established to be an outsider who travelled to Yharnam in search of this ambiguously elusive pale blood, you are treated as the monster coming to disrupt this new society's order. While it might be down to my own ignorance, the obscurity of the storytelling made me feel that the entire point of the journey was to search for meaning amongst the despair that's masked by goals and objectives that aren't entirely clear to you, either because they're beyond mortal comprehension like the Great Ones declare in a Lovecraftian fashion, or because an even greater force like moon presence is influencing your journey unbeknownst to you. I'm sure the more seasoned Bloodborne lore veterans will tear my perspective apart, yet I like to think of the Hunter's hero arc as contrasting with the doll in the Hunter's dream, in that you're a puppet gradually removing its strings, further echoing the puppets controlled by the host of the nightmare, as you begin taking control of your destiny through your growing insight. And I'm not talking about that stat on the top right of the screen, but how you as the player pay attention to how the world reacts to your actions, how people cryptically speak, how information is presented. It doesn't hold your hand because it's up to you to find truth within it. Only you can make sense of this nightmare and the horror it manifests. As a massive horror fan who feels it's a greatly misunderstood genre, Bloodborne captures this fear of uncertainty or clarity that makes up the complexity within it. I think how it unravels and deforms into something overwhelming just as you become accustomed to the world means you're constantly fighting to overcome it. In my first playthrough, I was awkwardly trying to bypass danger and obstacles when I could, either out of fear or frustration, but at some point what clicked with me was the realization that if you don't fear danger or death, it becomes quite a liberating experience. For as much as horror provokes misery and helplessness, Bloodborne encourages you to unmask it. There's so much more hope to it than it tricks you into believing with its macabre, depressing atmosphere. It brings the concept of bravery into the spotlight, in that the victims of the plague were weak-minded while the player is actively taking on the role of the hunter with unforgiving tenacity. You're standing above the horror as it tries to drag you back down. I love how you get familiar with the uninviting town of Yharnam, and then it throws curveballs to stun you like Nightmare Frontier or the Amygdala that begin appearing with more insight or during the Blood Moon. It's fiercely unpredictable and wants to suppress you, and so the best option is to play offensive as it's mechanically designed. I mean, practically speaking, it's about beating the shit out of things until you can successfully ragdoll them off a cliff. At least if you get hurt, the rally system incentivizes you to smack it back as quick as possible to recover health, thus reinforcing your strength to fight through the terror. I think that's why the perception of the hunt is so integral to the atmosphere. You are established to be unlike this New World Order, shall we say, and quickly you start to notice that your influence on the cycle of the hunt is met by heavy resistance by a world that becomes a character within itself. You are somewhat gradually taking control of this nightmare, changing it as it tries to entice you into becoming one of its victims, which in turn you also try to resist. I guess in a way, while the nightmare gets more dangerous and abstract, your greatest threat will always be succumbing to its dominating fear. It's up to you to emerge from it, and it's reflected in three varying conclusions. You can simply choose to awaken from this nightmare as if you've decided to run away from your fears instead of confront them. You can submit to the hunt and be bound to it like you've let your fears take control of you, or you can consume those umbilical cords and fight back against the true terror that's overlooked this nightmare the entire time. I know that's possibly a butchering of the general consensus, but I'm a man of emotion instead of intellect, so I'm just going to treat it like how I would interpret any art without insider context. I kinda like how your difference in this world is the lack of hesitation you show, unlike many of the other characters that fall victim to it, or get so feverishly consumed by the hunt that they inadvertently make themselves victim to it. The only thing you can trust in this world is yourself. The Hunter's Dream provides a thoughtful solace to breathe and ponder your next move. I never felt that anyone I met in this world was entirely trustworthy. Sure, there are several characters that appear overtly friendly, but it feels too good to be true because the world manipulates you into feeling a certain sense of nihilism. And that's of course besides the fact that so many other NPCs simply scorn or manipulate you anyway. Many characters are out for themselves, and so you organically develop the same defensive demeanor and self-preservation because you never know what any of them could be hiding. It makes wanting to escape this nightmare feel even more real because the emotional impact of this world makes you question everything to an uncontrollable extent. You learn not to be naive or gullible. It helps you understand that horror has a weakness, and that weakness is that fear has less effect when your mind tells you to be stronger. Its power is psychological, and so when playing Bloodborne, it persistently reminds you that there's nothing more terrifying than what our minds can create or make us perceive. Bloodborne essentially consolidates the importance of how we ourselves contribute to horror. That something that seems so real is only made real by our submission to our fears. But whereas most survival horror wants us to remain feeble to maintain its emotions, Bloodborne rejects its necessity. Instead, it firmly declares that you can fight fear by being fearsome yourself. Hi everyone, thank you so much for watching. It was one of my big goals of 2019 to do more video game content, and I'm going to commit to that. In fact, there's another video game coming hopefully quite soon. It's a pretty recent release, but I'm sure you can work that out, so I'm not going to spoil it. But for just a few dollars a month, you can head over to Patreon where you can get early access, vote on what the next video could be, and even get your name in the credits, which is always awesome. I love seeing that little list at the end grow. I have OCD, so seeing that grow every month is always really exciting to me for some weird reason. It's going to help me increase the production values because I kind of want to make this a little bit more professional because this is kind of my job now, and that's weird to me still. Thank you so much for the continued support. I am internally grateful for everything that you guys have given me a platform to do this. So yeah, until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye.